The most important part of realistic looking pieces isn't anything to do with details. In fact, it's not even got anything to do with colour. You don't really even need to use realistic colours to create a piece like this lion. It looks 3D, it looks like it's got loads of life, but it's painted with completely random rainbow colours. And it's understanding why those details and those colours don't actually matter that much that's going to put you on a path to becoming a better artist. Let me just start by saying that colour does actually matter a little bit, but probably not in the sense that you're thinking of it. Colour is a generalised term that we use to describe what we see. Artists split colour into 3 separate categories: hue, tone, and value. And it's all 3 of these aspects that come together to form what we know as colour. Hue is where something falls on the spectrum of light. It's the base colour for something that we would know as red or blue, for example. Tone is how saturated a colour is. Is it a really vibrant red, or does it fall on a scale somewhere closer to grey? And then value is how light or dark a colour is. It's how much light and shadow you can see. And value is the most important of all of those 3 scales of colour. Value's so important because unlike hue and tone, value adds structural integrity to your painting. It adds mass and a feeling of 3D structure. Every time there's a change in the plane of your subject you're painting, or every time there is a change in the environment, there's going to be a change in value. And we can use those value changes to add form and depth to the painting without even thinking about hue and tone. Of the 3 scales, value is the only one that can be used to create successful compositions on its own. So you might have heard of value studies, where people do things in black and white. Values can skew the quality of a painting so much more than hue and tone. You can have your hue and tone correct, but if your values are off, then your painting is just going to look flat, boring, and not very realistic. But if your values are correct, it can actually offset any errors that you might have in the hue and the tone of your painting. In fact, as you'll see a little bit later on in this video with my lion painting, you don't even actually need to use realistic tones and realistic hues to create a realistic looking painting, as long as you're getting those values correct. It's absolutely essential that when you're learning to paint, you're trying to look for those values first. You're looking at the light and shadow before thinking about any of the hues and the tones of the painting. The more you get a chance to study values and practice placing those values in the correct places, the more successful your paintings are going to be. One of my favourite things to do when I'm practicing painting values is to choose a completely random set of colours, something that's completely different to the true colours of the subject I'm trying to paint. I like to use blues, greens, reds, purples, oranges, yellows, you name it, all of the colours I can find. You could do these value studies in just black and white, that's like a grayscale, so blacks, greys, whites, but it's so much more fun creating something really vibrant with all of those colours. The actual colours that I'm using and the tools and the techniques that I'm using for actually creating this painting aren't that important. What is important is the idea behind the exercise. It's a way to train your brain to think about those large blocks of light and shadow without getting lost in the colours of the subject. It can actually be really hard to see those values if you haven't trained yourself to do so. But here are a few things that I do or I did that helped me visualize those large blocks of light and shadow so much more easily. The easiest method for me is to just blur my vision. I can change where my eyes are focusing so that the thing that I'm looking at becomes blurry. This makes it so much easier to see those big, large, basic shapes and stop worrying about all those tiny little details. If you aren't able to blur your eyes like me, you can also try looking at your painting side on. So you're using your peripheral vision to view that painting. It should have the same effect as blurring your eyes, creating that blurry, more out of focus subject. If you wear glasses normally, you can take those off. That's going to put the things that you're looking at out of focus. And then another alternative is to squint your eyes. That is going to put things out of focus as well. But you have to be careful if you're squinting your eyes, because it's also going to reduce the amount of light that's getting to your eyes, in which case everything's going to look a little bit darker than it actually is. So you have to take that into account when completing your painting. Another really great way to see values is to use technology. Use Photoshop or even your phone editing software to blur your reference, which again makes it so much easier to forget about those details and focus on those values. Once you've used these techniques for a few different paintings, you start getting a feel for the values. You start understanding where the lights go, where the darks go, without needing to do all of those previous steps. And what actually happens is putting value first and thinking about those large blocks of light and shadow becomes second nature, and you start doing it at the start of every painting. Now, it's all well and good me telling you you can look at these values and you can paint them, but how do you actually paint them? Because honestly, if you tried to paint every value that you saw, it would take you forever to finish a painting. So don't just paint what you see. Try to simplify it. In my opinion, mastery of a skill isn't just being good at it. Mastery comes from being able to do something well in the easiest and the simplest way possible. I've been reading up a little bit about how humans actually interpret colour, and it's a little bit up in the air, but the scholarly articles that I've read seem to think that humans can see the difference between millions of colours, and accounting for the differences in hue and tone, then that leaves us with about 500 to 700 different values that we can see. Obviously, trying to paint all of the differences in these individual values would just be way too much work. So we need to make it easier for ourselves. Firstly, try not to focus on one small section of the reference. Try to view it as a big picture. The way that our eyes work, as we focus on an area, the more contrast we see, the more values we see, and the more hard edges we see. Everything just becomes sharper, and you don't want everything to look really sharp in your painting. Step back from your painting or your reference and try to view it as a whole. Try to think about what are the fewest number of values that you need to convey that entire form of your subject. Traditionally for artists, that value scale, or grayscale as it's sometimes called, has 11 different steps. But for me, that's still too many values to think about, especially when you're just starting out as an artist, or even just starting out your paintings if you're a professional. So I like to break it down into 4 values first. An extreme shadow, not black, but a dark grey, a mid shadow, a mid light, and an extreme light. Again, something that isn't white, so like a light grey. With my lion painting, I've done this by splitting each of the hues that I've got, so those reds, those blues, those yellows, those greens, and creating 4 values for each. An extreme dark, a mid-dark, a mid-light, and an extreme light. I like to split my subject into those 4 basic blocks right at the start of the painting process. Then, after you've established that form, after you've put in those basic blocks, you can then focus in on one of those blocks and add more values and expand that value scale as you progress through the painting. Prioritising your values over colour or hue and tone and getting those areas correct goes a long way to creating strong, formful and way more realistic paintings. You don't even have to do this with random colours or even in black and white. You can see in this video here how I can use this focus on values to create a way more realistic looking lion painting. You know the drill. If you've enjoyed the video, please don't forget to give it a like and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.